this is Anna Runyon from ClassyCareerGirl.com, and today in my networking challenge, I'm speaking with Jennifer Crittenden. Jennifer is the author of The Discreet Guide for Executive Women, How to Work Well with Men, and I work with a lot of men, so I'm really excited to get her tips and her advice today. So thanks so much, Jennifer, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. So in a male-dominated work environment, how can women work better with men?
The first advice that I would give is don't treat them as the enemy. I've noticed when I was working on my book that there are a number of books out there that do take an adversarial role toward your male colleagues, beat men at their own game and hardball for women. I don't think that's the right approach when you're in the corporate world. You need to work, as a colleague to your male colleagues, to your male co-workers. And so the first step that you need to take is recognize that you're part of a team and they're on your side.
Okay. And what was your background then? So you worked with a lot of men as well?
I did. I was in corporate finance for almost 25 years. I worked for Bristol Myers Squibb, so a healthcare company. And because I was in finance, I worked with a lot of bankers and attorneys, and those often tend to be men. And, I started working on the book when I started noticing that my female colleagues didn't seem to be succeeding as well as I felt that they should, given that they were, diligent, intelligent, well-educated, but some of their behaviors were not helping them in this male environment. And so, I kind of just began observing that sort of midway through my career, maybe when I was at director level, bordering on VP, and then by the time I reached my highest level as CFO and was in the executive suite, there were no other women. Then they'd all either stagnated at the level that they were at or they'd dropped out. And that was very disturbing to me. So not only were they not doing very well, but they weren't there anymore. So that's when I became quite determined to write down some of the things that I felt could better equip women when they come into the workplace to really succeed and achieve these higher levels that we'd like to see women at in corporations.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you wrote it. I'm glad it's out there.
Yeah, I am too. Of course, it was my first book, and I'm not a professional writer, so you never know, what kind of reaction you're going to have. But now it's been out for a while. It's been out for 6 months, and so I'm getting enough feedback from people to where I realize that, that was true. There are things that we can say to women that will help them. And that's great. It's not as though it's a hopeless situation. We really can give women better tools to be successful.
So how can we get noticed and be heard in like a room full of men?
The first thing I would say, and this is basic, but we all make this mistake, is make sure you're nice and loud. We have smaller bodies and smaller voices, and when you're competing for airtime with guys who have big voices and big bodies, we have to remember that we really actively have to project. So make sure you're nice and loud. And then the other thing I would say when you're talking to guys is get in quick and get out quick. As women, we often have a tendency to introduce our idea in a very polite way. We might compliment the other person on what they just said, or kind of, have a lead-in of agreement, or have a hedge that we, maybe this is, an idea. And suddenly you discover that you haven't even gotten to your point yet and the guy has interrupted you. So make sure that you get to your point fast, and then get out fast. Once you've made your point, close very obviously by saying, I'm interested to see what you have to say about that, period.
Okay.
Because we have a tendency to trail off or begin to reiterate what we said if someone hasn't interrupted us, and so then they can tell that, oh, you're kind of done. I'm going to jump in on top of you, and it weakens your point if that happens.
Those are great. I totally see that now that you say that. I see that in the workplace, definitely.
You'll see it. Yeah, you'll see it a lot. It's very hard for women to be heard at work, particularly in meetings. There's another phenomenon that I talk about, which is the I just said that phenomenon. where you say something in a meeting and nobody says anything about it, nobody reacts to it, and then a few minutes later a guy says the same idea, and then everyone says, oh, what a wonderful idea that was. This really makes women so mad. I hear about this all the time, and it is a common phenomenon. I do sometimes think that it's not quite as clear-cut as it seemed to us, that maybe, the ideas are kind of developing on the fly. And so maybe it wasn't exactly the idea that you had, or, he used a word that resonated more with the audience. I think it's worth going back and kind of dissecting what happened, what you said, and why it wasn't picked up on, so that next time when you do want to present an idea, you can present it a little more clearly and get credit for it. And then I'm not shy. Sometimes I'll just say, hey, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. Just to kind of make the point that, I'm part of this team. I have a voice too.
Right. So what are some classic mistakes that you see women making?
Well, it can be a very tough environment, and so it's hard to stay brave, I would say. So, typically what will happen to a woman once she starts to struggle a little bit in the workplace is she'll begin to withdraw. And, so a lot of times you'll see a dynamic in which the guys in the team are all kind of in each other's face. There's a lot of interaction, activity, they see each other after work, and then there's like the lone female who doesn't really interact with them very much in an informal way, just in meetings or by email. You really have to become part of the network, and you have to let them get to know you personally, not just professionally. That's one of the hardest things, because when you're the lone female, it can be a little disconcerting, but you have to just get out there and mix it up with them. And the rewards for that are huge, because once you're part of that informal male network, they will come to you. They will include you on, in meetings in the hallway. They'll ask you to go out for beer. I mean, they will really value your input, but, you might have to make the first move.
Right. So if you encounter some bad guys at work that you have to work with, how do you recommend handling that situation?
There definitely are bad guys in corporate America, from liars to bullies to, sexual predators. You wouldn't think that this kind of bad behavior would be tolerated in the workplace, but it is. When the guys are otherwise performing well and producing, a lot of times companies will look the other way. That can be very difficult for their coworkers, especially if they're women, because a lot of times guys like to pick on women, and they seem to treat them as though they're just there for their amusement. And so, a bully sometimes won't bully the guys, but he'll pick on a woman, for example. The first thing to do is kind of identify who you're dealing with. And in my book, I do give quite a bit of advice about, not that we want to put guys in compartments, but how you recognize somebody who's a bully, how you recognize somebody who's a serious liar, not just someone who tells fish stories, but someone who lies to you to manipulate you. And there are ways of coping, with each of these individual types. The first thing that I would say is, do try and be empathetic. I know that that's very challenging, but often guys and women who misbehave in the workplace do have something a little bit wrong with them. They may have a terrible marriage. They may have had a very unhappy childhood. People are often quite twisted. And if you can sort of step back and, instead of being angry at their poor behavior, try and think a little bit about why they're behaving that way, you might find it a little easier to deal with them. The other thing that I suggest is try to find one thing about them that you like, because there almost always is one thing about even somebody who's a jerk that you can kind of resonate with and that you can turn to when he really is acting like a jerk. Sometimes it's his sense of humor. Sometimes it's that he's a good father. But I think it's useful to have these kind of go-to crutches so that you don't necessarily react to his poor behavior in an emotional way.
Right. And I find just like taking some time for yourself too, like taking a deep breath, like leaving maybe for a couple minutes and coming back.
I was just advice about how to keep from crying when you feel like crying. Crying is something that you don't want to do at work, and ever if you can. But it is difficult when you feel the tears coming up to know what to do. And so a couple of pieces of advice were try to count to 10, try and count to 1 from 10 back. That would distract me for a minute. Mm-hmm. As you say, take a deep breath. Try physically to release that tension from your body.
Right, definitely. So in all of the research that you've done, what do you think we can do as women to get past the glass ceiling?
One of the things that struck me early was that the male managers were not providing very direct and clear feedback to their female subordinates. That's a problem, because if guys coming up through the workplace are getting really, good feedback, direct information, specific constructive criticism about their work, that really helps them improve and helps them succeed. If the women are not getting that, that can hold them back. So somehow we have to make it safe for our male managers to give us feedback. And, the ways that you can do that, you can ask for feedback specifically, for example, and then also appreciation when you do get feedback. You can't react to it emotionally, because that, if you do, then that sends a message of I can't handle this feedback. And you want to send a message of I'm liking this feedback. I'm glad you're telling me this, especially if you're telling me something that I did wrong, because now I can get better. Mm-hmm. I think women who have played sports, that often comes intuitively to them because they've been coached, and so they know what it's like to be told you're doing something wrong and how to put that feedback in action and improve yourself as a result, which can be very rewarding. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the biggest things, is that we have to make it clear that we like getting feedback and make it safe for them to give us feedback. I just heard something that I thought was kind of neat. This woman that I was listening to said that she describes herself as a feedback addict. And I thought that could be a very nice lead-in when you're asking your boss for feedback. You could say, I'm a feedback addict, and so, could you please tell me how the meeting yesterday went or what you thought of my presentation? Because what's nice about that is it sort of implies that you're the issue, not the boss. So there's no implied criticism like, well, you should have been giving me feedback. Instead, this is kind of my deal, mm-hmm. That I'm a feedback addict. And I also thought the nice thing about that is then in the future, if he wants to give you some feedback, then he can say, I know you're a feedback addict, so blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Gives him a really graceful opening then to bring it up again when you weren't even aware that there was feedback to be given. Mm-hmm. So kind of a nice, that's kind of a nice trick.
Yeah, definitely. I always tell young women to ask for that feedback and to go to their supervisors. I think it's not always, it's kind of scary to do that, but I think it looks great upon them if they can do that and they ask for it.
Yeah, no, that's right. And it often is up to us to do it. Despite everything we've learned about managing, I find there really are a lot of bad managers out there. Mm-hmm. And especially male managers are kind of afraid of their female subordinates, and so they won't interact with them the same way that they do with, there's just not as much implied trust there. So they do tend to, kind of tiptoe around her and not meet with her as frequently as they do the guys. They don't have these kind of informal exchanges like they do with their male subordinates. And that's really to her detriment. I mean, she's not going to make it to the highest levels until she gets the same kind of support and feedback that the guys do.
Yeah, definitely. So this is one of the questions I ask at the end of all my interviews. What is one thing you wish you would have known as a young professional woman just starting out in her career?
There, on the LinkedIn discussion groups, somebody asked the question, if you could go back in time and tell one thing at the beginning of your career, what would it be? Mm-hmm. And it did hundreds, if not thousands, of comments from women. Mm-hmm. It's really quite moving to read all those comments, because there is a common thread that runs through them, and it is, be brave, have faith in yourself, follow your heart. You know more than you think. And I feel the same way. When I look back, particularly when I was in graduate school, I'm so sorry that I didn't engage more, that I didn't stick my hand in the air more, that I didn't take teachers more. I was pretty insecure. I didn't have a business background. I wasn't sure that I really belonged in business school. And so, as a result, it made me less, I think I learned less than I could have. I think I had less of an impact than I could have had. And that probably, goes through to your first job, too. The combination of courage and common sense is such a powerful combination. But I think, and most of us have common sense. I mean, we do, but we don't quite have the courage to on it or to put it in play. And so that is the one thing that I would say, as they have all said, be brave, trust yourself, you're tough to think, and you know more than you think.
Right, definitely. I love that. So where can people find out more about you online and about your book?
Sure. So the book is called The Discreet Guide for Executive Women. Try and hold it up here, see if you can see that. And then my website is discreetguide.com. I'm also on Twitter now, as though I were a famous person.
Yay!
So I'm working on some kind of another topic besides communication and gender. I'm particularly interested in sports language at work, because I hear so many sports metaphors in the workplace, mostly from men, not so much from women. And it's almost like there's a whole language, that guys get into when they're talking about teamwork and, stepping up to the plate and hitting it out of the park. So I have a degree in linguistics, so I'm interested in those things. So I've been doing tweets about those kinds of things, gender issues, or quotes, or jokes, or, remember when Obama did his speech that was all full of sports metaphors? So, of course, I had to tweet about that.
Cool.
So, but there's a lot on the website. A lot of stories from women now that I'm hearing now that the book is out. Some of them funny, some of them not so funny. I mean, I've learned a lot since the book has been published about women's experiences at work, and some of it is, fairly sobering. We definitely have a long way to go. Mm-hmm. And then I've written some more articles kind of complimenting the book. There's a funny quiz on there. Are you cut out to work? And it's just for fun, but kind of a Cosmo quiz. There's a joke. So, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff on there.
Awesome. Well, I'll have to check it out. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here. This was a lot of fun.
Very much, Anna. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Awesome. Well, this is Anna Rennie from ClassyCareerGirl.com.